Thank you all for being here. My name is Sean Winter. I am Vice President of Global Client Success for Movius. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm joined by two distinguished colleagues that you can see, and actually one more that you can't see who's working behind the scenes, but we'll go through introductions in a second. Tara Panu is our Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience, and Javier Solis, right below her on my screen at least, is our Client Success Director of Global Financial Services. Javier joins us from Madrid, Tara from San Francisco. I'm in Richmond, Virginia myself, so we have the world covered here to some extent. And then behind the scenes is Jean Cameron, our Senior Director of Channel Marketing, who will be recording, handling Q&A on all those other necessary items as well. Like I just said, this is being recorded, so we will certainly share it after, in addition to some other helpful documents that can help guide your journey here. For Q&A, we're trying to keep this very casual and conversational. So feel free to post either in the chat window or in the Q&A window within Zoom, and we will respond in real time as best we can. If not, there will be some time at the end of the half hour for questions as well. And I guess that's it. Be as involved and as you feel comfortable, and we're here and we can go with the flow. So in addition to myself, I did want to quickly turn over to our esteemed guests and colleagues who are both in hotspots actually right now for the COVID-19 crisis. Tara, I'll start with you. If you could give us a brief introduction and some background on yourself, and then we'll move to Javier and then we'll get started.
Great. Hi, everybody. Like Sean mentioned, my name is Tara Panu. I'm based here in San Francisco, California, and I'm responsible for marketing, customer experience, and really excited to be here and to get the conversation started. So.
Thank you, Tara.
Hi, Sean. I am Javier Solis, based out of Madrid, Spain. I work as Client Success Director, specializing in global financial service institutions, and it's really great to be joining everybody in this session today. Wonderful.
Thank you, Javier. And especially, I know, like I said earlier, things are probably a bit crazy in both San Francisco and Madrid. Certainly hotspots as I look at the COVID-19 map. So thank you for being here and taking the time.
You're welcome.
As far as what we were hoping to accomplish today, a few high-level goals. And like I said, we want to keep this very conversational, but we did want to give you an overview of what the MultiLine product is. Who is it for? There are some common roles that we see a lot of our larger customers roll out to, and we want to go through that. How easy it is to launch. If you're like me, you've been part of IT projects, whether on the software side or the communication side for many years, and you know that some IT projects can get very, very complicated. We have some checklists and some decisions and some other things that we're going to go through today that make it very easy to stand up this solution in just a matter of hours. So we'll walk you through that as well. Why has it been successful at certain places? What are some of the best practices that some of our best customers have done? And finally, where does a firm start? We know that in current times, it's very challenging right now. Lots of companies are going through lots of changes, whether it's with regulated employees, whether it's working from home, whether it's the addition of new technology, you name it. And we're all kind of running around like chickens with our head cut off. So how can we help you and make this as simple and straightforward as possible? And we'll be happy to go through that as well. So to get us started, I did want to do a quick overview of MultiLine and what it is, and I'll start with a question for Tara. Obviously, we've seen a lot of companies go through some pretty massive changes in the past few weeks. Things that we never thought we'd see. Right, regulated employees now working from home, people setting up Bloomberg terminals in their living room. You name it. Obviously, this poses a lot of challenges for both communication and collaboration, especially in a regulated environment. What are some of the key challenges right now that you see firms dealing with, given the news over the past few weeks and this sort of massive change in terms of how people work? And how can Movius MultiLine help to solve for that?
Yeah, great. I think, Sean, when we're talking with a lot of clients about this, right, and what we're seeing is when people are scrambling, looking at their contingency planning and their processes, there's a lot of tools that are out there that I think first it's about connecting your employees, right? Making sure folks around the world are connected, they're able to access a lot of critical company information and that their work doesn't get compromised, right? And there's no lack in productivity from that standpoint. So there's a lot of tools that are out there that help promote that, right? Like what we're doing right now with Zoom and others and Slack. But I think the other area where they're challenged is now you're having users like traders who are used to being behind the 4 office walls and transacting with clients, now all of a sudden are having to do that in their living room, like you mentioned. And I think the one area where we're seeing a lot of potential gaps in this is that how are you enabling those types of employees at the front line to continue to communicate, transact with clients, service their clients, but ensure that there's no gaps in compliance, right? They're still able to meet their regulatory requirements. A lot of times those conversations need to be captured and archived. And the minute you start, I think, letting your employees loose and are remote, all of a sudden, there's potential risk, right? Because, they have challenged around just overall oversight, right? How are they monitoring this? How are they supervising this now all remote? And with a lot of IT and compliance teams, they're time strapped, right? So they need to do something very quick because every day that is wasted is, potentially, clients are going to be wanting to get a hold of their advisor a lot quicker.
Right.
And so I think the immediacy of that is really sparking this challenge, is that we need to be able to ensure that there's zero disruption in that workflow. And I think that's where there's an opportunity where MultiLine can add a lot of value.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially we're living in what looks like a perfect storm, right? You have massive amounts of volume being traded on the stock market. At the same time, you have a lot of your traders unable to get to their recorded desk phone. So tell me, how does MultiLine help solve that problem? For instance, I have my own device here, and I remember back in the day when I lived up in New York on the subway, I would constantly see people going back and forth in suits with multiple devices in their hands, with a desperate need to get to their desk phone as quickly as possible. Tell me how the MultiLine product works in terms of bringing a separate recordable line to my personal phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in this scenario, I think the intent behind it is that we are in a mobile world, right? If this doesn't show anything, I think this is not something that's here and now. I think this is something that is in the future, right? So I think we do a lot and we transact and we access that mobile device. And that's what's dear to us. So I think from a MultiLine perspective, designing it, the intent of it being mobile first, and as simply as it is a secure app that you can download on any device. Doesn't matter if it's your personal device or if it's a corporate device. That is, the ownership model doesn't matter in that regard. But now essentially in seconds or minutes, you're able to download a secure app that gives you a second number that you can give to clients with full, complete texting, calling capabilities, a separate voicemail. So essentially now you're able to really separate your business conversations from your personal on any device.
On any device at home, right? Home. So I don't need to get to my desk phone.
Yes, and
go ahead.
The one big area as well is that I think that when you think about different remote scenarios, right, is people have different carriers that they have, right, different plans, and I think the big area that we're all experiencing is that reliability in this scenario, especially with these types of users, is critical. And so the one area where MultiLine really is differentiated in that way is the fact that it actually can operate over any connection type. So whether that you're connected to your home Wi-Fi, right. You've got a strong data signal, or if anything, if those two don't work, it actually can, you can make and receive calls using your underlying radio network of the carrier. So what that means is that same way you're accessible on your phone, right? You're able to have the same reliable service no matter where you are, and options to be able to switch between the two.
Understood. So this is different than your traditional voice over IP solutions, especially now as we're all hammering our in-home Wi-Fi networks. And we read every day about other collaboration tools having challenges. With MultiLine, I can use my cellular service to have a regular, normal, clear phone call, and not be solely relying on voice over IP.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. I do see a bullet here on compliance. I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on this briefly, and maybe I'll go to Javier for this one. I know you've worked with a lot of our very large customers, especially in the financial services industry, global firms that are rolling this out across multiple countries, multiple use cases, multiple roles. From a recording perspective, what have you seen? Is that top of mind for a lot of these firms, especially now, and how easy is that to set up with MultiLine?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. So, we find that some of the roles that have been impacted most these days are those primarily in client-facing positions. These are users that used to be working from an office, and suddenly now they are away from there, they are working from home, but yet again, they need to be in contact with their clients. It's even more important to have this contact with them than ever. They need to keep the same service levels that we are having before, but they have to do this in compliance with the same level of compliance that the firm has been always providing. So think about positions like wealth managers, asset managers. This solution is critical for them. So in this respect, what we offer these users is the ability to have a very convenient communications mechanism, an application basically, as Tara just explained, which is in full compliance with privacy, data protection, and recording regulations. So we can do things such as ensuring that all these calls from these users get compliance recording. We can do things like redacting content of their text communications. We can enable opt-in, opt-out, and we can basically provide a scenario where they have the same level of compliance they would have in their offices, but being remote, being mobile. Now, the other position, which has been very much impacted by the current scenario, is the traders. So these were users subject to very heavy regulatory requirements, not only around recording, but also around retention and security of electronic communications. This used to be typically working from within closed offices. We are also enabling these users now with remote compliant communications so that they can keep their business away at their homes.
That's great. That's great. Tara, I think we're all clear on the financial services possibilities here. And any other verticals and roles that you are currently seeing from our client base that are, that have a really great need given COVID-19 and what's going on in the world today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing a lot of traction and need, and especially in healthcare space. When you think about the home health arena, imagine now you've got caregivers and nurses that are either used to servicing patients in their homes, right, and needing to communicate that way. We're seeing a preference for texting and real-time communications, and I think that that's also another great application and use case for this, because I think the one other area to highlight is the fact that this does not require your client or patient to have to download an app, right? That this is not, they're used to calling and texting very simply. And so now everyone's remote. So this is another great use case within the healthcare arena, because it's still the same level of ensuring that patient privacy is intact, that, definitely the data that's exchanged during text messages is secured, it's encrypted. So the same rules, very similar, right, type of requirements from a compliance perspective, but also I think it's the immediacy, right? At the end of the day, they need to get a hold of their provider, their caregiver, the same way a client needs to get a hold of their advisor. And so being able to enable that in a very simple, effective, and quick manner is really important.
Right, so. Right. And then I have a lot of experience in this one, because that standard EHR workflow, right, is I get an email telling me I have a message in a portal. I usually didn't even know the portal existed. I go there, I don't know what my login is, I don't know what my password is. Maybe 30 minutes later, I'm lucky enough to get in, and then I have to navigate to the message just to read whatever the message is. And so it's great to know that MultiLine, from a secure and compliant perspective, allows caregivers to communicate directly with patients. That seems like a much easier scenario for the patient than what I just described.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on to the security and compliance piece. I know we touched on this a bit earlier with recording, but as you can see here, a lot of what I call this is the acronym slide. A lot of the major regulatory firms have, or major regulatory regulations, we are in compliance with. But I did have more of a personal question. I know rolling out a product like this, a lot of people think that everyone's going to get it instantly. And while it is super simple, right, it's an app on your phone. That's something we're all very comfortable with. There is this idea that my device is a personal device, and now you're asking me to do work-related communication, whether it's phone or texting on the device. How can I ensure that number one, my company can't see my personal content and vice versa? Because I can imagine a lot of people are a bit nervous about that. They're used to maybe carrying around multiple devices or sitting at their desk phone all day making trades. How do we tackle that from a Movius perspective to ensure that our customers, fully understand that there is absolutely no commingling of data between personal and work related, and that as a user, I'm going to have a simple time figuring that out?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take this one, Sean. It's a very good question. It's a very fair concern. So users will typically want to know, how can I know that we are not mixing personal and business communications data with this MultiLine? So our solution is based on a principle called privacy by design. As a matter of fact, this is a principle that is even regulated by law in some regions, like in the EU. And we achieve this by providing a fully separate mobile number, which is completely different, not related to your personal mobile number. So this splits your communications in two. All business communications stay with this new number. They stay within the application. The application does not use permissions to look into your personal data. So you as an end user can simply ensure while installing that you are not giving those permissions. And it is fully encapsulated so that you don't mix business and personal. This is not only about protecting the user's privacy, it is also about protecting the firm, because the firm in many territories will not be allowed to look into your private data. As a matter of fact, we can even take it one level above, and we can have this fully encapsulated with device management solutions, where the application will sit in a sandbox, in a container, and will not be able to access absolutely anything from your personal data.
So that would be like a BlackBerry or an AirWatch or a mobile iron?
Absolutely, or a Intune kind of solution.
Intune. Yes. But everything on the app, if I don't go through an MDM provider like we just discussed, everything in the app lives in the app, right? So not only my text messages and phone calls, but my contacts. So there's no way that I could accidentally be in an iMessage talking to one of my work contacts, because it only lives in the app.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, great. That's certainly helpful. To jump off the change management topic here, I know we've all been part of lots of large IT rollouts. And I did want to sort of lean on both of you here. And we'll start with Tara from what you see in terms of our guidance to clients in terms of rolling this out. I know we've worked for a long time on a checklist, and we have one here that's probably a little more specific to the situation going on in the world right now. But Tara, we'll start with you. In what do you think are some best practices and sort of in terms of what to consider before rolling this out, and why this is different than, let's say, an enormous IT project? And then Javier, I'd love for you to chime in, given your experience with some of our large customers. Where did they start? Where did they go next? What worked? What didn't work? And how can we get this as simple as possible for companies, like I said earlier, that right now are dealing with so much change? We want them to have a very simple experience and to be able to turn this on as quickly as possible. So Tara, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
What jumps out to you on the screen here?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, especially with this right now, everybody's remote. I think it's understanding the people that are in the front line, the types of users, right? What are their profiles like? What is that day in the life, right? And we want to be able to first minimize that disruption, because they're the ones, servicing clients, they're retaining their customers, and they are responding. They're your first responders in that regard. So I think understanding who those are, being able to identify that, understand what are the tools that they are given to be able to effectively do that. It's one thing to be able to be connected to your employee within the firm, but it's another to ensure that now you're in your comfort of your own home. Do you have the right tools to be able to effectively continue to communicate with your clients? And I think those client-facing roles, especially, slight nuances, right, in terms of they may have certain policies that are applied to them, right? For example, a financial advisor may need to have their text messages recorded versus a trader where it's predominantly their voice calls. And so we were able to accommodate both, but I think it's being able to identify what those are, what their needs are, and then that's a great starting point. I think that's what jumps at me looking at this list.
That's great. Javier, when you're dealing with some of our again, these large global, complicated regulated firms that maybe have different regulations depending on the country or the role or the line of business, what have you seen in your experience? I know you've been here a long time. You've worked with a lot of big companies. What are some tips as far as where to start?
Yeah.
Or maybe I always like the opposite of that, where not to start can always be helpful as well.
Yeah, actually, it's better to know where to start, and usually we start by identifying, as Tara was saying, the users, the roles, and the geographies. So we really want to know, okay, this is the user base I need to serve. It's this many users, this many thousands. They're in these locations, and they're using the communication tools for this, this, and this. That is super helpful because with that, you can decide what kind of success metrics for your rollout you will have. In in a traditional situation, maybe your success metrics is how many corporate devices you have retired. Now, in an emergency situation like the one that we are having, maybe your success metrics is I want to enable 25,000 users within 2 weeks or something like that. So it will be very helpful for you to identify user base and success metrics. Once you have that in place, I think that the other very important thing that we do in phased rollouts, in emergency rollouts, we set up a target launch date. One of the things that we can do with MultiLine is that this is a full software solution. So the timescales that we manage, they are just a fraction of your typical IT mobility deployment, which involves physical devices and hardware and logistics. This is much, much simpler. We can enable, and we have enabled thousands of users in a matter of days, and days means less than a week. So I would say that these are the key points: your users, how are you going to measure the project, and set a target date would be the most important.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I think you make a good point, because this isn't a voice over IP solution, right? These are real phone numbers that exist with real quality carriers all over the world. So it is super important to understand how many users you have in different countries so that we can map those to the correct carriers so that you have a great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. This being a global solution, identifying the countries is a key starting point so that we can map them onto the right mobile provider and ensure they have this top quality service.
I did want to touch real quickly on the target launch date piece. I know we work a lot with companies that have a specific compelling event. And obviously there's a massive one going on now that I think everyone understands. But aside from a pandemic crisis where everyone needs to work from home, what other events have you seen companies go through that drive the use of a product like this? I can imagine a bring your own device program would be ideal for something like this. Is that something we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. That is a major driver. So outside of these emergency and crisis situations, the BYOD programs is something that we see more and more often. So through these programs, companies can introduce very large cost savings by no longer having to manage like a real estate of mobile phones, corporate mobile phones that can be retired. They can become much more flexible, and they can provide better use to better service to their users, because their users will now be able to use the phones that they like with the latest versions of their operating systems and everything. So definitely that is one of the big compelling events for rolling out the solution. Another one is compliance itself, and we've seen this across many, many industries. Things that maybe 12 months ago were not subject to any regulation, verticals where this was not a relevant item, are more and more becoming more scrutinized. They have more strict regulations, and this is where a solution like MultiLine enables you to do it in a very, very seamless way and super cost efficient.
You know, that brings up an interesting point. We actually have a question from the audience that I wanted to bring up, because I can imagine if I am a mobile device manager or an IT executive at a large firm, and I'm trying to wrap my hands around this. I have so many different kinds of devices different versions of devices, different versions of operating systems, different carriers. How does that work? Does the administrator actually need to know every device that's out there, and do they need to go to Movius for a different solution for each of those devices, or is it easier than that?
It is much easier than that, and we got you covered on that one. So our teams will basically do the certification of the different operating systems. We have a long-term support policy, so you don't need to be on the latest version of the operating systems. Many companies have policies that you have asked you to be like 1 or 2 versions behind. So we got you covered. From an administration perspective, it is much simpler. You have a MultiLine application available for iOS. You have a MultiLine application available for Android. And you just invite the users. You don't even need to know whether the user has Android or iOS. The onboarding process will automatically get the right thing to the user. So no need to worry about the operating system, the device, and no need to worry about the carrier. As Tara was mentioning at the beginning, that is one of the beauties of the MultiLine solution. We're completely carrier agnostic. No matter what you're using, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, Vodafone, or a very unknown carrier in Tanzania, we will be able to run on top of that one.
Wonderful. Thank you, Javier. We are running short on time, so I did want to, again, if you have any questions, hit the chat or the Q&A function within Zoom, and I'll weave those in. I did want to ask both Tara and Javier, because I know you've spent a lot of time with clients, whether from an implementation perspective or from a case study perspective. Any success stories that you'd like to quickly call out to inspire those that are on the webinar today?
Yeah, I'll start with one. I think going back to the compelling event, 2 years back when MiFID II, the regulation out there and in Europe came into fruition, one of the investment banks located in Ireland, they traditionally had, right, their within the office walls, their voice recording capabilities, and they were actually trialing our solution during this time. And it's one of those events where they had to get something in place to meet this regulation. So they were looking at all kinds of technologies. But again, very hardware, SIM-based, very dependent on the location. And actually what had happened was there was a flood that actually knocked a lot of their capabilities from their office, right? So they weren't able to access that. And that regulation was, was starting. And so it was one of those areas where, well, mobile, right? Our people are mobile, and we have to be able to accommodate when things like this happen. And so it's one of those stories where that really helped accelerate, very similar. So no matter how small or large, I think the fact of the matter is that designing a strategy to accommodate mobile and building everything else behind that is really important because you never know what will happen, right? This may not be the last time that something like this happens, and you have to accommodate users travel, users are everywhere, and they can access their clients. So it was one of those stories where they didn't have an option B, right? They needed to get something in quick, and it was one of those moments where the user experience became really critical. I think that was a big propellant, and it was something that was very easy for them to manage, right? Like Javier mentioned, right? Being able to administrate it over the air, onboard them the same day. I think now the CTO at the time talked about it where it's a fire and forget solution, right? So if I don't have to worry about it, I just know I'm meeting my compliance requirements, that's success to me. So that's one that I like to share as well during this time.
Javier, anything to add there in terms of success stories? I know we've seen traffic jump through the roof in the last week and a half. Yeah. I'm amazed at how rested you look.
Yeah, it's sadly, because there's a sad reason behind this, but traffic has surged in the last few days. And let me give you some data points. Like last week, in one of the days with the highest traffic we've ever seen, in one single day, we had more traffic in our solution than 3 times what we had the previous month, the month of February. So just one day in March was 3 times all the traffic in February. Now, the reason for this is real sad. What makes us little bit, proud because we are doing a little bit our bit is that we're helping people stay safe, work from home. One of our customers has deployed recently like 4,000 users that before they had to go to the office, and now they're enabled to be working from home, and at least we are, doing our little bit here.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. Certainly, obviously, like you said, it's an interesting times that this has driven the need for a product like this, but we're certainly here to help, and we look forward to the opportunities ahead. I do have a question from the crowd. How long does it take for my company to be able to use your service and lines? How long does it take to set up? And anything in particular I need to prepare? And let me answer that second one there. The checklist that we showed earlier and some of the points we made about that, we're going to share that with everybody after. And that has sort of a great, some great guidelines in terms of what to think about. But from a true provisioning perspective, Javier, maybe I'll turn to you. Assuming the client knows their users, the countries, how many lines they need, how quickly can we have something up and running?
Yeah, we can get you going in 3 to 5 business days, roughly. It's a quick process. Once you identify the geographies and the numbers, we deliver to you, we help you with the invitation process, and there you go. 3 to 5 business days should get you going.
And so if my employees are already home, will they need to come into the office to pick up anything, or is everything done via software, via the cloud, via their phone?
Everything will happen remotely via the cloud. All that they need is to have a Wi-Fi connection for the initial onboarding, and you're good to go. No need to go to the office, no need to interact with anybody. You can do it remotely, safely from home.
Tara, anything to add there?
No, I think the other area too that we touched on, we talked about a lot of the end user side of it. And I think the one big benefit in this scenario is that, IT strapped, right, with everything that's happening,
Right.
with the number, for us to be able to remove one of these elements off the list is really important. So I think from an IT and even from a compliance perspective, oversight, very simple to manage. I think now being able to centrally manage your users, centrally manage the numbers. If you have recording enabled, depending on the type of user and your compliance requirements, being able to actually have that all in one place, I think is the biggest benefit, especially now in getting something up and running really quickly. And I think that's another area to highlight because people are strapped, right? People don't have time, and being able to provide them that assurance. We talked about being able to provide them that ease of transition. They may have a lot of other systems that they use to capture, retain, and analyze, but right now they don't have time, right? They want to enable their frontline. They want to minimize disruption to their end clients because they need them more than ever now. And so being able to provide them that ease of use and that centralization of that data on day one in real time is really critical.
Got it. We have questions rolling in here, so I'm going to try to go through these as quickly as possible. We do have a question from Tony about onboarding. Can one of you give us kind of a brief overview of the onboarding experience for an end user and what support we offer as well?
Yeah, so as an end user, as part of the checklist as well as part of this process is identifying, there's different roles from an administrator perspective, right? There may be somebody responsible for issuing a lot of the invitations. So the minute they do that, right, you will receive it either through your phone or more often than not through your email. So as an end user, all I do is I receive the email invitation. I go and prompts me to go into the App Store. I download the application on my device, and I already have my corporate credentials, right, provided to in that invitation, and I just fill that in, and then I have the app up and running. And if I have recording, all of that is built in, right? So the other area is that there's zero user, interaction with that capability. A lot of those policies, any features that are important to me are already enabled for me, so I can get up and running right away.
That's interesting. You mentioned the recording piece because there's another question about recordings, and this is probably a future webinar with everything that we can do here. But at a high level, we have a question: where are recordings held and for how long? So I wonder if we could give the 1 minute recording option answer, assuming there's a 1 minute answer.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very flexible with that one. We provide cloud-based recording if needed, and we can store your messages there for a period of your calls there for a period of time. We can upload these recordings into certified recorders. We have APIs, and we've integrated with basically the vast majority of the archival solutions in the market. We also support live streaming into recorders with standardized protocols. So we are very flexible there. As a matter of fact, one of the things we can do, and this can help the rollout strategy, we can maybe start with cloud-based storage, keep your recordings there for a few days, weeks, months, while you get ready with an in-house archival solution, and then we can integrate with that one. So very flexible there, but we would need a webinar to cover all the options.
Tara, anything to add on that one? I know we've been spending a lot of time going through this lately.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, especially right now, what we're doing with a lot, and I think for us to be able to help, and even the example I gave before is that, you know, I think time is of the essence and they need something in very quickly. So for us to be able to offer and extend the, you know, and make it easier for a lot of firms to ensure that they have records of this data and that doesn't fall through the cracks, right? Because a lot of times is once we eventually come out of this, being able to go back and actually retrieve that is going to be really important, right? And so a lot of metrics and a lot of customers have shared that they've been able to survive the audits, right? And so for us to be able to extend and offer, you know, 90 days of extended storage on the data is really critical. And I think it's to help them with that transition while they figure out everything else.
Right. We know there's so much else going on right now that, yes, I completely agree. I do have one more question I wanted to get to, which is specific to other collaboration products. So Microsoft Teams is specifically called out in the question. But Teams allows companies to connect seamlessly, right? How is MultiLine different? Maybe Tara, I'll start with you on that one. From a Teams or a Slack, right? I know a lot of people are familiar with using them, and Teams and Slack claim to have, you know, HIPAA and FINRA compliance, and if deployed in certain ways and used in certain scenarios. How does that compare with what I can do with MultiLine?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, those tools are great, right, from collaboration and real-time communications, but I think it's important to understand how people are using it, right, and the use case behind it. And I think the main difference is when you think about MultiLine and from an external communication standpoint, right, again, you don't need to have the other party have an app, right, have to download and be on the same system or software, right? It's they just simply call, they see a number and they were able to call and text, right?
So if I'm a client and it's my financial advisor telling me to sell, I can, I just get, that comes into my normal phone and via text or voice, I can say yes or no, and that's it, done. I don't have to call back to the office and they connect me to someone's desk phone and.
Exactly. I think this is what gives that direct one-to-one. And I think that one-to-one engagement is the use case that I think where how we've deployed it, how our other customers have used it. And I think for those critical functions where you're, you know, responsible for driving revenue, you're responsible for maintaining relationships with those clients, that's where MultiLine is being used.
And I would assume a product like a Teams or even a Zoom or a Slack would have not only challenges in the recording aspect of the vocal pieces, but also there's no phone number associated with that.
That correct. And I think the other area too is when you think about, again, right, is the fact that we can operate over the underlying carrier network. I think that reliability piece is really critical here, right? It's a full-fledged, you know, mobile phone service. And so I think when you never know, right? You know, I have AT&T and where I am, I have, you know, I have poor Wi-Fi and data connection, but I have a really strong like tower signal here. So I know that I'm always connected. And I think that is the big area when you think about scale and a distributed workforce, that becomes really critical. And that's where I think this becomes differentiated in that manner.
Wonderful. Well, we're about 11 minutes over. I appreciate everyone sticking around. I'm gonna wrap this up in a second. We did have one last question I wanted to touch on. One of our attendees noticed that we had a piece in the product slide about a connection into Salesforce. What does that, just from super high level, I know this is probably a future webinar, but Tara, could you give us the 30-second How does this work with Salesforce? What's the use case there?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, right, think about your sales, your revenue generating, your client engaging employee, right? So now with this integration, all your calls and texts and conversations with your clients automatically get captured and logged inside Salesforce. So, the number one biggest pain for any salesperson is having to manually log. And the data quality, right? We all struggle with that, right? With our CRM. Right. So the ability to take that away, automate that process where all your conversations are logged, you get that 360 view, right? And that full visibility into your customer touch points. And the other benefit also is that for those that live in their desktop and live inside your CRM, you actually have the ability to call and text within your Salesforce, right? By clicking that number. So again,
oh, it's great. And it's all recorded the same way?
Be recorded, yes. So it doesn't really matter. So I think, again, it's that user experience. We're following the day in the life of that salesperson and ensuring that they have access to their clients and they're able to continue to communicate no matter what interface that they're using.
Wonderful. Well, Tara and Javier and Jean, I want to thank you so much for your time. We'll be doing more of these for everyone on the call. I've heard potential topics around healthcare. I've heard potential topics around Salesforce. Archival and recording sounds like that could be its own session as well. So we'll be in touch and follow us on LinkedIn to see what we're up to next. We're trying to make this a weekly event. And if you have any suggestions for topics, we'd love to hear that as well. Again, this is recorded, and so we'll follow up with the link to the recording as well as the key decisions checklist document. And I think that's all. I want to thank everyone for taking the time, especially Tara and Javier, given everything that's going on out there in the world. Anything to add before we close up shop here?
Nothing for me. I think this is a time where it's nice to see that ideas being shared, and I think anything we can do our part and help is really important. So I think having these weekly conversations, it's a great way to educate and then also get more ideas. So looking forward to more of these.
Absolutely. Javier, anything from across the ocean?
No, thank you very much, Sean, Tara, for this time. I think these webinars are very interesting, good opportunity to share ideas and to also get in touch with our colleagues and people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing your expertise. If you want more information, again, follow us on LinkedIn or head to the Mobius website. And you'll be able to see everything from product demos. You'll be able to get in touch with us if you want to learn more about the product. And again, any ideas for future webinars, we are certainly open. Awesome. So on that note, I'll say goodbye. Everybody have a good morning, good evening, good night, depending on where you are, and we will chat soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good one.
Bye.